Something is wrong here. What is hidden inside? It sounds like the kind of question that should have a clean answer. You look at something closed, something solid, something finished, and you assume there is only one way to think about it. Either there is something inside, or there is not. That is how we usually take it. Simple, direct, nothing unsettled about it. And at first, that feels safe. It feels like the outside should tell you enough. Like the shape of it, the surface of it, the way it presents itself should already narrow things down. You expect the inside to follow the same logic. You expect it to belong there. But then, something stops fitting. Not all at once. Just enough to make the surface feel less helpful than it should. Enough to make the idea of inside feel less stable than it sounded a moment ago. You keep the same question, but it does not sit the same way anymore. Because once that small mismatch appears, the outside no longer feels complete, and the inside no longer feels obvious. You start with something that seems closed, and somehow, that only makes it harder to trust what closed is supposed to mean. So what is hidden inside? The first thing hidden inside is not a thing at all. It is a rule. Below the Vatican, the shelving runs so far under the low vaults that distance becomes the dominant fact. Metal uprights, fluorescent light, labeled boxes in long measured rows. The place looks less like a chamber of secrets than a storage system that outgrew ordinary buildings. The boxes are not anonymous. Dates, pontificates, offices, series numbers. Church memory reduced to sequence and placement. If there is concealment here, it seems procedural. A reading room table sits under the same cold light with open folders arranged for consultation. And at the back, a locked door states the limit plainly. Authorized entry only. That explains a great deal. What is hidden inside? Mostly records, and mostly from people not permitted to see them. The papal correspondence supports that answer. Bundles of letters tied with faded ribbon rest in numbered compartments behind wire partitions. Century after century of petitions, instructions, disputes, appointments. The scale itself breeds rumor. Miles of shelving become, at street level, stories. A printed sign bearing the old phrase, Archivio Segreto, hangs beside a corridor, where tourists stop at the barrier, and read the word, as if it promised forbidden content. But secretum in this setting points to private custody, not occult material. Private archive, not magical vault. The misunderstanding is almost enough to account for the mythology. Almost, because the arrangement is too deliberate to be merely old paperwork piled underground. The numbering is exact. The partitions are selective. Some correspondence series are described down to sender and date range, while access remains dependent on approval, rather than on any visible difference in the records themselves. If the hidden element is only privacy, why preserve the appearance of openness in the reading room, while placing the decisive threshold one door farther back? Why display consultation tables at all? The answer seems practical once the room is considered as a machine for controlled memory. Open folders in front, locked storage behind. Scholars admitted by credential. Requests match to catalog entries. Nothing supernatural is required, only scarcity. The archive is hidden because not everyone may enter, and not everything may be called for. That fits the shelving, the labels, the ribbons, the barrier upstairs, even the public confusion over the word on the sign. Then the ordinary details begin to press in the wrong direction. The boxes are labeled, but not for public browsing. The letters are arranged, but behind wire. The reading room exists, yet the locked door remains the most legible object in IT. A private repository should be closed. This one is visible enough to advertise its order while withholding the order's full use. The secrecy is not darkness. It is selection made physical. So the question narrows. Not whether something fantastical is hidden inside. Nothing in these vaults requires that. Not yet. The more exact question is, who decides which part of memory becomes readable, and when? The shelves answer with quantity. The door answers with silence. And between them, the archive begins to look less like a buried legend than a controlled surface. Vast, documented, ordinary in material, and secret in the only way that may matter first. by permission. At first, the answer seems procedural. The room is cold, fluorescent, and ordinary enough to flatten rumor. A thick trial register stamped with Galileo's name lies on a foam cradle under a shaded lamp, its spine repaired, its folios numbered in a clerk's hand. Nearby, a parchment petition bearing Henry VIII's seal sits alone in a fitted case, not because it glows with legend, but because wax, vellum, and royal insignia age badly under careless light. Gray wartime file boxes line a separate room with date ranges stenciled in black. A shelf section stands behind a metal gate with tags showing future opening years. Private archive, selective archive, delayed archive. The arrangement appears to explain itself. If this is what is hidden inside, then the secrecy is not mystical at all. It is administrative pressure applied to records with consequences. Galileo's file is not dangerous because it is occult. It is dangerous because it preserves procedure, accusation, signature, sentence. Henry's petition is not a treasure. It is leverage fossilized in parchment, a request whose refusal helped redraw Europe. The wartime boxes suggest the same logic on a larger scale. Diplomacy, blame, silence, timing. The gate with future dates gives the rule in metal form. Some papers are not denied, only postponed. That explanation holds while the dates remain broad. Then the labels begin to narrow it. The wartime boxes are arranged by year, but not evenly. One run covers months in sequence. Another skips from early spring to late autumn, with no gap marker, no transfer note, no damaged box notation. On the shelf behind the gate, opening years are attached not only to recent material, but to collections whose outer folders carry much older event dates. A file concerning one crisis is withheld long after adjacent files from the same period are already open. Delay, then, is not simply a matter of age. The Galileo register sharpens that problem. Its catalog entry identifies the trial plainly enough, but the internal references point outward to correspondence volumes stored elsewhere. Some consultable, some not. The visible record is complete enough to establish what happened in court, incomplete enough to blur who argued what before the hearing reached the page. The Henry petition behaves similarly. The seal is intact, the text legible, the chain of transmission less so. Endorsements on the reverse indicate review by offices whose related memoranda are dispersed across separate series. The famous document survives. The surrounding decision trail thins out exactly where motive would become measurable. That still suggests politics. Sensitive holdings, controlled release, reputational management. It is a convincing answer until the opening years are compared across categories. Scientific censure, royal marriage, wartime diplomacy. Different centuries, different risks, same staggered access pattern. Not all are sealed for the same duration. Not all are grouped by the same rule. Some are held by pontificate, some by tribunal, some by subject, and some by no visible logic beyond caution. So what is hidden inside? Not a single forbidden thing, and not merely old paper under lock. The visible pattern points to records whose danger depends on context. A trial that reaches beyond astronomy, a petition that exceeds marriage law, wartime files that may alter who knew, who asked, who delayed. Yet the shelving does not sort them by event alone. It sorts them by the trouble they can still cause when read beside something else that is not yet on the table. The first answer seems almost disappointingly administrative. What is hidden inside the Vatican Apostolic Archive? Not forbidden machinery, not a chamber of marvels, but delay. In one aisle, document boxes marked with 20th century dates still carry unbroken wax decades after the years written on their spines. The dates are ordinary enough. The closure is what draws attention. If the contents were merely old, they would already be in circulation. Their secrecy appears to come from timing. That explanation gains weight a few shelves later. Two editions of the same church decree lie side by side, and the earlier copy still shows crossed out lines under the later wording. The difference is not decorative. A phrase narrowed here, a condemnation sharpened there, a name omitted in one version and fixed in the next. Nothing supernatural is needed to explain concealment, if records like these survive in sequence. What would need protection is not treasure, but process. Who argued? Who hesitated? Who revised the official line before it became official? The deeper cabinet supports that reading. Folders labeled for schisms and condemnations fill a drawer deeper than the surrounding sections, as if controversy required more paper than doctrine. The labels are procedural, not sensational. Hearings, responses, censures, appeals. The hidden core begins to look like a long record of decisions the Church preferred to release on its own schedule, after witnesses died, after factions dissolved, after blame could be distributed more safely across time. Then, the chronology starts to snag. An entire run of boxes from one pontificate sits wrapped in cloth while neighboring reigns stand fully catalogued, their shelf marks complete, and their finding aids typed. The wrapped run is not from the most distant period, nor from the most physically fragile. The cloth is clean, the ties uniform, the spacing exact. If this were only a matter of age or backlog, why would the adjacent pontificates be processed down to individual series, while this one remains grouped as a block? Why preserve access before and after, but suspend the middle? The decree revisions offer one answer. Perhaps that reign generated too many politically dangerous drafts. Yet, the box dimensions complicate that. The wrapped series includes narrow correspondence cases, broad ledger cartons, and several mid-sized containers whose labels give only year ranges, not offices. A cataloging delay usually leaves traces of partial order, provisional numbers, penciled subjects, transfer slips. Here the outer control is meticulous, and the inner description absent. That absence sends attention back to the sealed 20th century boxes. Their wax is intact, but the shelf cards beneath them have been updated more than once. Dates of transfer, dates of restriction, dates of review. Someone tracked them closely without opening them for readers. So the archive is not simply withholding neglected material. It is maintaining controlled intervals around material already known to be sensitive. The drawer of schisms and condemnations now looks different as well. Its depth may not reflect quantity alone. Several folders carry later cross-references to collections elsewhere, and some of those references point into the wrapped pontificate. If the hidden matter were only embarrassing episodes, why split related records across separate closures? Why let one file remain available while its companion stays under cloth? By this point, the ordinary explanation still holds most of the weight. What is hidden inside appears to be evidence of decisions managed through delay, revision, and selective framing. But the shelves do not arrange themselves around embarrassment in any simple way. They arrange themselves around sequences: what can be seen now, what must wait, and what only makes sense when another box, from another reign, is finally allowed to answer it. At first, the answer seems administrative. The Vatican Archive is full of restricted material. Some of it is politically delicate. Some of it waits decades for release. A second barrier inside the complex could simply mark another level of control. In one narrow room, though, the arrangement is harder to file under routine caution. Locked wooden armaria stand behind a barred door already inside a controlled area. As if ordinary restriction had been judged insufficient and then repeated in wood, iron, and distance. That still admits a practical explanation. Fragile holdings are often segregated. Uncatalogued material is kept apart until described. The inventory ledger nearby appears to support that. Shelf numbers run in a clean sequence, then stop. Several lines remain blank. The numbering resumes pages later. A clerk may have reserved space for entries not yet completed. Archives do that, but the blank stretch is too long for a few delayed descriptions, and the resumed numbering does not match the physical room count. One armarium should correspond to 3 listed compartments. Another has no visible place in the ledger at all. If the gap was left for later cataloging, why do later hands enter measurements in the margin? Height, width, bundle count, without titles. Why record dimensions, but not contents? The lower rack offers one answer. Oversized bundles, wrapped in plain canvas, lie there with tags tied to the cords. No titles, only abbreviated shelf marks and lengths. 112 cm, 134 cm, 97 cm. That suggests format rather than subject. Maps? Perhaps? Rolled plans. Ceremonial textiles awaiting transfer. Large things are awkward. Awkward things get temporary labels. Then the tags stop behaving like temporary labels. 2 bundles with different lengths carry the same abbreviated mark. Another is described in the ledger as fash, mag, but occupies more depth than a stack of paper should. The canvas has corners where a roll should curve. 1 bundle sags in the middle and rises sharply at one end, as if enclosing mixed shapes rather than a single flat body. If these are only oversized manuscripts, why avoid even a generic title? Why note dimensions so carefully and subject so little? A nearby shelf narrows the question and makes it worse. Between parchment volumes sits a small reliquary box, metal-edged, too compact for a museum display, and too deliberate for accidental placement. If it had been transferred there for lack of space, the surrounding sequence should break. It does not. The manuscripts on either side belong to the same run. The box has been inserted into the order, not abandoned in IT. That makes the armoria look less like overflow storage, and more like a category the catalog does not want to name directly. Objects kept with text can still be explained. Relic documentation may need to remain with the item it authenticates. Provenance chains are easier to preserve when paper and object stay together. Yet the ledger resists even that. One entry gives a manuscript count, then adds a notation usually used for containers. Another line appears to describe a chest, but is shelved under a textual series. A third references seals intact, though no title follows. If the purpose were simply to preserve evidentiary context, why hide the context itself behind blank lines and duplicate marks? The room begins to suggest not treasure, and not merely embarrassment, but materials that could not be sorted cleanly into either archive or collection. Things read, things witnessed, things enclosed. The barred door explains caution. The armoria explains separation. The ledger almost explains the silence. Then the shelf numbers stop matching again. At first, the question seems narrower than the legends allow. What is hidden inside? Not monsters, not a treasury, not a single forbidden page. The shelf evidence points somewhere more procedural. A packet of relic certificates is tied to a fragment box, no larger than a legal folio, and the labels do not agree. One tag gives a monastery in Umbria. Another, written later in a different hand, names a church in Provence. The certificates are not decorative. They carry dates, witnesses, seals, and transfer notes. The box was preserved because someone needed the chain of custody to remain available, even after the chain stopped making sense. That would explain the retention. Not secrecy for its own sake, but containment of disputed, sacred matter. Things too uncertain to display and too dangerous to discard. The next shelf supports it. Condemned visionary notebooks, their pages dense with numbered revelations and corrections in the margins, rest intact in acid-free enclosures. They were not pulped, not burned, not broken up for excerpts. Their survival suggests administrative caution. If a text had stirred devotion before censure, destruction could create a second scandal. First the vision, then the erasure. The red folders nearby make the pattern look complete. Sealed testimonies concerning apparitions stand upright with wax stamps still unbroken. Each folder marked by place and year, but not by outcomes. Testimony preserved. Judgment withheld. Access delayed. Hidden inside then would be a class of materials the institution could neither authenticate nor publicly absorb. Relic claims with unstable provenance. Visionary writings too influential to vanish. Miracle reports suspended between devotion and risk. Then the tray on the lower shelf interrupts the neatness of that explanation. It holds a cracked devotional object, padded on all sides, with warning slips and retention notes tucked beneath the linen support. No certificate identifies it as a relic. No docket links it to a canonization cause or local cult. The notes are practical rather than devotional. Surface instability, prior enclosure, do not separate associated papers. If the concern were only disputed sanctity, why preserve an object whose status is left unnamed? Why keep the object with the papers at all? The associated papers answer part of that. One note records that destruction was considered and deferred. Another states that removal from the file would alter the evidentiary condition. So the object is not merely being protected, it is being kept as part of a record. That makes the room less like a reliquary overflow, and more like a holding zone for cases in which matter itself became testimony. A fragment, a notebook, a sworn account, a damaged devotional article. Each item preserved because its physical existence had entered a dispute. Yet, the dates do not settle into one category. The relic certificates span centuries of transfers. The visionary notebooks were condemned within a decade of composition. The apparition testimonies remain sealed long after the reported events. The cracked object carries retention notes from two separate offices, one doctrinal, one administrative. If these were simply failed claims of holiness, why are they not grouped by process? Why do some have provenance files thicker than the objects they describe, while others survive with almost no origin record at all? And why do the warning slips emphasize scandal in one case, authenticity in another, and custody in a third? The hidden core begins to look less like a file of embarrassments than a chamber of things that could not be cleanly classified. Objects and records preserved together, because separating belief from evidence, or evidence from danger, would have required a decision the archive still has not finished making. The question sounds simple until the boxes are compared. What is hidden inside the Vatican Apostolic Archive? Not in the tourist sense, not behind rumors of a single forbidden chamber, but in the records themselves. On one table, two folders from separate collections describe the same date, the same city, and the same hearing. Their paper stock differs by decades. Their seals differ by office. Even their titles disagree about what happened there. One calls it an inquiry. The other, a clarification. The witness list overlaps in 6 names and diverges on the 7th. That looks, at first, like ordinary bureaucratic duplication. One event copied into different administrative streams, each preserving its own version. That explanation holds a little longer when the shelf marks are checked. The folders were not misplaced. Each belongs exactly where its catalog says it should be. Separate provenance, separate custody, separate filing logics. The archive begins to look less like a vault of secrets than a machine for preserving institutional viewpoints. If the same event appears twice, perhaps that is because Rome recorded it twice for different purposes. Then, a private papal memorandum appears beside a printed decree on the same matter. The decree is clean, formal, and final. The memorandum is crowded with handwritten margins, hesitations, and one instruction that points in the opposite direction. The public text closes the question. The private note keeps it open. Dates narrow the gap to 3 days. If the decree represents policy and the memorandum represents deliberation, the contradiction is manageable. Governments draft one thing and publish another. But the filing order complicates that comfort. The memorandum is preserved not in a preparatory bundle, but in a later collection assembled after the decree circulated. Someone retained the conflict instead of absorbing it into a finished record. Why preserve the abandoned line of thought with equal care? Why docket both the answer and the hesitation? A few shelves away, a heretical treatise copied in careful script sits with rebuttal notes attached to its cover. The copy is neat, complete, and corrected in the margins by a trained hand. It was not seized and neglected. It was reproduced accurately enough to survive argument. That suggests another practical explanation. Dangerous texts were kept only to be refuted. The archive hid what it needed in order to answer it. Yet the rebuttal notes stop halfway through the final section. The remaining pages are untouched, though the script remains consistent, and the quires are complete. Nearby, investigation files end in a final folder stamped closed, but the last page is unsigned. Not missing, present, numbered and blank where judgment should stand. Closure without conclusion. Conservation without endorsement. By then, the earlier contradictions begin to align in a different way. The duplicate folders are not simply copies. They preserve incompatible official memories. The papal note and decree are not draft and result in any tidy sequence if both were intentionally retained. The copied treatise was not merely neutralized, if half the refutation was never entered. The unsigned page is the hardest detail to file away. A case can be closed administratively while remaining unresolved in substance. So what is hidden inside? Not one answer withheld from the world, but records that cannot be reduced to one answer at all. In these shelves, the dangerous thing is not a single document. It is the continued coexistence of rival versions, preserved under the same authority, each too consequential to destroy and too unstable to settle. The room that matters least to rumor is the one that keeps drawing the eye. No carved vault, no hidden stair, just a climate-controlled chamber with painted saints above steel cabinets. The labels are plain enough. Pontificates disputed in life, disputed again in retrospect. If the question is what is hidden inside, the first answer seems procedural. These are the papers that can still move blame. A decree read one way clears a secretary. Read another way, it stains a pope. A private archive is not a treasure room. It is a delay mechanism. That explanation holds in the next aisle. A release cart stands under white light with newly unsealed files stacked in gray trays. Older labels remain on the boxes. Names attached for decades to accusation, then to defense, then back again when another folder appears. The dates on the release slips are recent. The events inside are not. A memorandum withheld for 80 years can reverse who ignored a warning, who authorized a transfer, who protested in private and signed in public. The hidden thing, then, is not an object at all but timing. Custody controls sequence. Sequence controls history. Then the shelf for miracles interrupts the neatness of that idea. The boxes are not mixed into doctrinal correspondence or legal appeals. They stand apart under dimmer light, marked neither approved nor condemned. Their dates spread across centuries, but the handling notes are unusually consistent. Retained under seal, no public citation, no destruction order. If these were only politically dangerous, why preserve them in a category that refuses decision? Why not absorb them into ordinary case files, or close them with the rest of the investigations? The chamber beyond answers part of that. Disputed relic fragments, sworn testimonies and papal notes occupy the same secured space under a brass cross. The arrangement is awkward if the archive is organized only by administration. A fragment with uncertain provenance sits beside witness statements about cures. Nearby, a note in a papal hand asks for caution without ordering suppression. The grouping suggests a different kind of risk. Some materials could not be endorsed without enlarging them, and could not be discarded without creating a second scandal. The destruction of something that might be authentic, or might already be venerated elsewhere under another name. That would explain the custody marks. It would explain why doubtful relic-linked material survives at Al. It would explain why unresolved apparitions remain sealed, rather than denied. But the cabinets of contested papacies are still there, and their inventories do not stay in their lane. Cross-references from those cabinets point into the miracle shelf. A file on a disputed election cites testimony, later reclassified under sanctity claims. A box associated with a politically fragile reign contains notes on a healing report, never judged. The same names recur in both places, not as saints or frauds, but as witnesses, patrons, enemies, beneficiaries. So the contents are not divided between politics and devotion after all. They overlap in ways that make release dangerous in more than one direction. One document can alter historical blame. The testimony attached to it can also strengthen a cult, damage a canonization cause, or reopen, whether a public decree concealed private uncertainty. Under sacred custody, preservation itself becomes a statement without becoming a verdict, and that leaves the most practical question still sitting in the room. If these materials are kept because no single judgment can safely contain them, what else in the archive has been cataloged by shelf and seal, while actually waiting on a question no one wanted to answer first?